Have you checked the children? Your little messenger.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Sometimes that is better.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Bienvenidos, Fright fans. Welcome to the horror show. I'm Jaime in Fuego, and so very stoked to have you here for another brief solo review while we are technologically hampered just the slightest degree. And this is for a partnership that was done between Fangoria and Shudder, two of the biggest and most prominent names in all of horror today, obviously. I mean, Shudder more recent, Fangoria with very much more of a just prolific history, especially with being able to relaunch a year or so ago. And it's none other than PORNO. Yeah, PORNO. This movie was something else, and yes, it is unrated, and yes, it is it's pretty sexual at times, but it's got a premise of interest, in all honesty, and one that I enjoyed. Execution wasn't always there, but I definitely had fun with this film. So it was actually given a like a video on demand release, kind of like what we've been seeing with some of these bigger blockbusters, but it was done specifically through independent small theaters throughout the entire country. So being here in the deadly desert of Arizona, I gave some love to Phoenix Film Bar and spent the $12 hairs and got to watch this from the comfort of my Fire Stick, which was dope. And so yes, it was a limited engagement though. And yeah, it's still going to get a proper VOD release sometime soon. But yeah, this is one to keep your eyes out for, because while it's not like a modern classic or anything like that, it is damn enjoyable. And so this is the directorial debut from none other than Keola Racela. And so, yeah, it's a little bit of like short and TV work previously, as I'm looking here at the IMDb and such. But yeah, this is the featured debut of this particular director. And yeah, it was enjoyable. Overall impressions, as we always do on here. I had fun with it. It made me laugh. It was violent at times. It had a couple super gross out moments. And I mean, being a red-blooded male here in America, there is a very nice demonic vixen who is our antagonist, and as we segue in the story, we'll get a little bit more about her. But I mean, she's going around showing off her goodies, very much of like the 80s and early 90s variety of horror, where the nudity was a little bit more gratuitous than what we often get in this day and age, where there's been, many movements to go against the just objectifying of these, beautiful, people and stuff like that, women specifically, obviously. And it's a big problem in Hollywood, and it's definitely something that needed to be addressed. But there is something to just seeing a beautiful individual on screen, and so on and so forth. But so yeah, long story short, I laughed, I enjoyed the sights and the sounds and the silliness of it. And horror with comedy elements is always my favorite, because of the fact that, I mean, stretching back to like, Army of Darkness, and then later on Dead Alive and things of that nature, I've always enjoyed the melding, because of the fact that it's like an ebb and flow, so it gives you some breathing room in the midst of those peaks and valleys. So the laughs give you almost a false sense of security and so on, and then it gets gory again, and there's kills, and you're just like, oh, okay. So story overall is the fact that there are kind of these two pervos, but one is much more notorious that work at this movie theater, and there's a couple others there. There is a guy and a girl, respectively, as well, that have like a little bit of history, chemistry, and stuff like that. They had a falling out when dude went away for the summer, came back. But yeah, so it's just a bunch of youngsters in the early 90s where they're showing stuff like Encino Man and A League of Their Own. And so it was amusing in that regard. But yeah, they're all working together. And there is also a kind of strange and derpy Christian like owner / manager is kind of the vibe that we get from him, and he's in charge of all of them. And so they're like praying at the beginning of their shifts and everything, and having been raised with that sort of indoctrination and whatnot, I was like, oh, this is getting me right back to what I remember my adolescence being all about. But So it's just very amusingly counterbalanced when it veers into them finding a very surreal, almost like 70s satanic art house kind of film. And in turn, as you see in the trailers, when they watch it, there is a just beautiful but evil demonic presence of sorts, otherworldly, whatever, that starts to just kind of wreak havoc on them and is trying to play a seductress role, but can like morph and take different shapes and stuff like that. And really, more so than anything else, it's the camaraderie of some of these characters. There is a really genuine friendship between the longer haired dude who was like peeping Tom status at the very beginning of the movie. In the initial scene, him and like his goofier, scrawnier friend who, they got themselves in trouble for something at one particular point as well. So that's something to keep in mind. But I mean, they have a friendship that is tested, and it's it just shows good, almost like best friendy, borderline brotherly camaraderie. Which being the oldest of 3 boys in my family, I can appreciate the hell out of that. And then the love story between the guy who went off for the summer and then came back, and this girl who was resentful for him never talking to her throughout the duration, that didn't really work as well for me. She's a babe, though, and she was a good actress, and she gave a pretty solid performance, which we will segue into here in just a sec. But you know what? It's the perfect time. I've given you enough of a premise. This is a spoiler-free review, and so, my favorite guy in this movie, he is the slightly aging dude, and he's not aging. He's probably like mid-20s at this particular point, if not even a little bit younger, because you get the vibe the other kids are supposed to be high school, even though, yes, the horror, and not just horror, but just like filmmaking in general, when you have high school students that are being played by people in their early 20s, hey, it's just the nature of the business in a lot of ways. But Heavy Metal Jeff, man, he is back from school, living with his mother, but yet he is trying his damnedest to be this like straight edge kind of guy. They all call him Heavy Metal Jeff, and he's like, no, I'm into hardcore, I'm not into heavy metal. And so that's his big just point of contention and trying to clarify with these kids. But he is funny, man. He's got kind of the grunge look going, despite the fact that he's more into old school hardcore and stuff like that. And I mean, it is like borderline thrash that he's listening to in some ways, but I mean, he's a character that made the movie for me. Some of his dialogue as he is trying to abstain from cigarettes, of all things, being his major vice and stuff. I mean, he brings the most laughs. His performance was the most memorable, the most amusing, and he was the one who really made the movie for me, because the other 4 kids, I mean, they weren't bad, but it just didn't bring as much of a unique perspective to the table. Like, in some ways, as far as being driven to, well, I mean, they're not so much being driven to insanity, but they're all like kind of tripping out a little bit, and there is an element of a possession factor and whatnot. So I can't compare it to something like Cigarette Burns, which is Carpenter's film, where it's full-on horror, and a movie makes people go insane and become like killing machines or anything like that. But I mean, there is the slightest bit of thematic similarities to just an evil movie and what it could potentially do to people, how it could change them, how it could scar them, mess them up, trip them out, whatever. And I mean, once again, there's no bad performance in this, but Heavy Metal Jeff was definitely the one that shined the most for me. I was also amused by the manager slash, just the guy who runs the theater. He was good too. And despite really, like, I'm trying to remember if she even had any dialogue, this demon woman, except from when she's like taking, various forms and stuff like that. But she is able to exude a essence of sexiness, but yet dread and the very, I don't know, like frighteningly forbidden fruit. Like, I don't know, it's the whole kind of satanic vibe of the 70s and those sort of films that gave this like eerie allure to those sort of themes and that sort of filmmaking and stuff like that. So it is kind of sending up those movies, and I mean, she does a very solid, convincing job in this. If we're going to jump into effects and stuff, there's not like a super abundance of gore. It's not like constant throughout. Don't expect something like Deathgasm, Dead Alive. I love that New Zealand filmmaking and all its grotesqueness. So it's not just nonstop. But when it does happen, it's pretty grody. There's a scene in a bathroom that is very well done. And the most memorable and disturbing for me as a man is something to do with testicles about halfway through the movie. And it is graphically done, and I know this is unrated, so it didn't go through that proper rating system, but it would probably get an NC-17 rating at least for how graphically the essence of this is shown. But it's also, despite the fact that it's condensed to pretty much one location throughout the entirety of the film, being this movie theater, it's still, I mean, the production values are high, and I enjoyed the set design. It felt very early 90s authentic in that regard, which I appreciated. And then even beyond that, shot selection, camera work, especially for a first-time feature director, I thought that this was very well done, and it impressed me. Kiola did experience beyond what I see on the IMDb, and I really have to give credit there. The soundtrack is eerie at times with like moody sort of bits and stuff like that, and then I appreciate the hell out of that more like metal hardcore sort of vibe that they went to, a few times in the film, and it's definitely on display in the trailer, so I appreciate the heck out of that too, and that's really the extent for Porno. I still remember when I mentioned in the group thread a week or so ago, I was like, yeah, blah, 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 porno, so on and so forth. And everyone's like, what are you talking about, Fuego, you sick little son of a bitch? And I had to give some clarification about this. So, is it going to go down as one of the most memorable films that I have seen thus far this year? It was fun. It was fun. Not instant classic or anything like that, but laying this sort of groundwork with a first feature and the amusing sensibilities and everything, it's definitely, it's a filmmaker that I am going to be keeping my eye upon, and especially if it gets the endorsement of Fangoria and Shudder. I don't necessarily know if I would have recommended the $12 price tier, but this would be most definitely something that if it eventually does arrive on Shudder, and I would assume it will, but if for whatever reason it's some other streaming service, I doubt that to be the case, but it is definitely something that you should seek out to stream, because it is a good like 90-something minutes of just gory, silly fun, and I appreciated the heck out of that. It was a nice distraction in the midst of all of this, having to film things from home and the self-quarantining and social distancing and everything that is still going on in this weird world that we exist in right now. So I've been Jaime Fuego. You can find moi on all social media sectors like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. I do have my own YouTube channel that if you have any interest, you can totally search that out. But if you have things you would like to request us to review, that's the biggest thing, is that we have a link in the description below to our Patreon, and that's where you can request film reviews. You can do commentary tracks for a little bit more, ducats in the tip share sort of thing, where we will dedicate that time when we can reconvene together and do a commentary track, or we even have a boogie box tier, which is where a bunch of the swag that we get from various companies, we kind of comb a package together and we send that out to you. And that's if you want to be the most supportive and I guess, the most badass donation to our cause. It is supremely appreciated. So I've been Fuego, y'all have been Rad Status, and until next time, Fright fans, remember, stay scared and stay healthy and watch more horror.